Today I have for you one of the craziest games that I've seen in quite a while. How this one flew under my radar for the past 6 years I couldn't tell you, but for the 41 years that it existed prior to that, I can tell you exactly what happened. It was kept secret and was long forgotten until 2019 when Garry Kasparov's former coach Alexander Nikitin finally revealed it to the world in his book entitled Coaching Kasparov Year by Year and Move by Move. The game took place in 1978, directly after the final round of the USSR Championship, in which Mikhail took first place and the 15-year-old Garry Kasparov came in ninth. Right after the last round, Tal and Kasparov went to the press center and proceeded to play 14 games of blitz, the most spectacular of which we're going to be taking a look at today. This rich and tactical struggle between two of the greatest attacking minds in the history of chess is really something to behold, and it ends exactly how you want it to end, with an astonishing sacrifice of the queen, then a rook, culminating in a picturesque checkmate that you will not soon forget. So I think I've said quite enough. Let's take a look at some moves. Kasparov is playing white in this most epic encounter, and he kicks the game off with e4. Tal responds with the Sicilian defense, after which we have about 13 moves of very well-known opening theory, with knight to f3, knight to c6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight to f6, attacking the pawn on e4, knight to c3 defends, d6, adding some coverage to the e5 square. Black doesn't want any knight takes c6, followed by e5, giving a prod to the f6 knight, since he no longer has queen to a5 with check to pick up that pawn. Next is bishop to g5. This is known as the Richter-Rauser variation, and it's one of the most popular openings of all time. Tal responds e6, enabling him to meet bishop takes f6 with queen takes f6, as opposed to capturing with a pawn, which would compromise his kingside structure. We have queen to d2, preparing the castle on the queen side, a6, preventing any knight to b5, targeting the weak d6 pawn, since Tal is about to block his queen's defense of that pawn after Kasparov castles with the move bishop to d7, which, for those of you who aren't familiar with the theory, is superior to an immediate bishop to e7, as it retains the possibility of responding to bishop takes f6 with queen takes f6, leaving the d6 pawn defended by the bishop, thus preventing any knight takes c6, followed by queen takes d6. Next we have f4, taking more central control, which positionally speaking is always a good thing, but here there are specific tactics supporting this move as well, which become immediately relevant after b5, now played by Tal, looking for b4 of course to undermine the defense of e4, but after bishop takes f6, now played by Kasparov, queen takes f6 is no longer a viable option, which is why Tal didn't play it. Pause the video and see if you can see what Black's problem is here. White can get a winning advantage now with the move e5, supported by the f4 pawn, which means that the only way Black can capture that pawn is by playing d takes e5, opening the d-file, thus allowing knight d takes b5 with the discovered checkmate threat on d7. Of course, Black didn't have to capture the pawn on e5, but that would be even worse, for reasons that I'll leave to your imagination and/or further study if you're interested. Tal, undoubtedly aware of this opening trap, after bishop takes f6, responds with the correct move, g takes f6, damaging his kingside pawn structure, but he does have the two bishops and now more central control. Next we have a trade of knights on c6, followed by queen to e1, looking to possibly reroute to the king side, while setting up another sneaky idea, which is to play knight to d5, since if e takes d5, there'd be e takes d5 with check, picking up the bishop on c6. And this is a tactic that shows up in a lot of Sicilian positions where the move e6 has been played with the king still in the center, so it's a good one to be aware of. Tal responds bishop to e7, further blocking the e-file, and so rendering knight to d5 unplayable. Kasparov develops his bishop to d3, we have queen to b6, getting the queen more active, getting off of the d-file, along which the white rook is lurking. Kasparov plays king to b1, because you should always play king to b1, unless you're an engine, or insightful enough to realize that in this position, king to b1 is probably unnecessarily cautious. An immediate f5 is apparently a bit stronger. The game is still tracking the mainline opening theory of the day though, but that's about to change after the move Tal plays next, which is castling queenside, a big blunder. Feel free to pause the video and see if you can figure out what's wrong with this move. White can get a big advantage now with the move knight to d5, hitting both bishop and queen, and if pawn takes knight, then the recapture will create a dual threat to the bishop on c6 and to the undefended bishop on e7. Black can try queen to b7, defending e7, but then there's queen to c3, attacking f6, while pinning the c6 bishop to the king, and so threatening to win it with the pawn if black now captures the knight on d5, which by the way would seriously mess up his pawn structure. So this position is losing for black. Kasparov misses this winning shot though in the game where he just plays rook to f1, putting his rook on a file that he is planning to open up with f5 followed by f takes e6. Tal, apparently having become aware of the knight to d5 threat, now prevents it by retreating his bishop to b7. Next is f5, king to b8, a good move, getting the king a bit safer. And now we have an inaccuracy from Kasparov with the move queen to g3. The engine was recommending a3, preventing the knight from being kicked from c3 with the move b4, which Tal does not play, but this is best for black since after knight to a4, queen to a5, and b3 defending, black can play e5 followed by a quick d5, which white can no longer prevent with bishop to c4 without losing his e-pawn to bishop takes e4, as a consequence of having moved the queen from its defense. So that's why Kasparov's queen to g3 is not correct. Tal doesn't play his best move b4 though, he instead goes for queen to c5, looking to post up on that nice central e5 square. Kasparov trades pawns on e6, we have knight to e2, headed for greener pastures after queen to e5 with the move knight to f4, applying some pressure to the e6 pawn. Rook d to e8 indirectly adds defense. Bishop takes e4, of course, would not win a pawn in view of bishop takes bishop, followed by rook to e1 and knight takes e6. Kasparov adds defense to his e-pawn anyway with rook d to e1, which is just fine. Next is rook e to g8, hitting the queen, which goes to h3, increasing the pressure on e6. Bishop to c8 defends, although it wasn't yet necessary since queen takes e6 could have been met with queen takes queen followed by rook takes g2, and of course if knight takes e6, then bishop to c8 would pin and win the knight. Next is queen to e3, looking to start some queenside drama beginning with queen to b6 check. Tal is having none of that and plays queen to c5, blocking while offering a trade of queens, which Kasparov prudently declines with queen to e2. Seeing that he is the one that stands to benefit from keeping the queens on board, having the better attacking prospects with his much safer king. Next we have rook to g5, just increasing central control, maybe the rooks will double on the g-file, and now we get a very nice top-engine move played by the young Kasparov, c3, with the simple plan of rerouting his bishop to b3, and once again ramping up the pressure on the weak e6 pawn, which of course black should never push to e5, as this would create two gaping holes in his position on f5 and d5, one of which could be immediately occupied by white's knight. That would be terrible. What's played is rook to e5, adding more defense to e6, since Tal knows exactly what's coming. We have bishop to c2, threatening knight to d3, forking queen and rook, hence the move queen to c4, again offering the trade of queens, which Kasparov once again declines with the best move in the position, knight to d3, attacking the rook. It returns to g5, and now comes bishop to b3, attacking the queen, which goes to c6. At which point Kasparov fails to find the strongest move, h4, attacking the rook, which cannot go back to e5 due to the presence of the knight on d3, and so must abandon the fifth rank with something like rook to g7, when after knight to f4, black has no good way to defend his twice attacked e-pawn. The engine is recommending e5, which of course is very sad and quite losing. Kasparov, missing this opportunity, instead puts his knight back on f4 immediately, allowing rook to e5, defending e6, while pinning white's e-pawn to the queen, and so threatening to attack it with the pawn. Kasparov again has the opportunity to play the decisive knight to d3 followed by h4, but instead he just moves his queen to c2, breaking the pin on his e-pawn. Tal continues queen to c7, a rather sneaky move with the idea of playing d5 when if white were to respond e takes d5, then black could win material with rook takes e1 check followed by queen takes knight on f4. Kasparov, apparently aware of this, adds some defense to his loose knight with g3, at which point we have the inexplicable decision by Tal to play bishop to b7, just removing defense from e6, which for some inexplicable reason Kasparov does not capture with his knight or his bishop, either of which would be winning, but instead plays king to a1. Now, were both players seeing some variation where they thought that the white king being on the same diagonal as the queen was going to be a problem? I don't know. Maybe there's another reason the pawn wasn't captured. Let me know in the comments if you have any ideas. But anyway, after king to a1, we have f5 from Tal, which is losing. Better would have been queen to d7, defending the e6 pawn, which Kasparov can once again capture with the winning position. But his move e takes f5 is also winning after e takes f5, when his most decisive option is rook takes e5, followed by knight to e6, attacking black's queen with queen takes f5 next. But he plays knight to d3, which is still winning, though less decisively, if black responds with his strongest move, rook takes e1, which Tal does not, opting instead for bishop to e4, pinning the knight to the queen. Looks promising, but Kasparov finds a very nice rebuttal with the move rook takes e4, sacking the exchange. And after rook takes e4, he's got bishop to d5, attacking the rook. It goes to e3, but here comes knight to b4, and along with it, the threat of knight takes a6 check, forking king and queen. Tal defends with king to a7, but now we have a4, looking to obliterate what's left of the black king's pawn cover. Tal responds queen to c5, trying to be proactive, adding defense to his rook, to his b5 pawn, eyeing white's bishop. Maybe he can play rook to c8 next, preventing knight to c6 check, which incidentally is white's strongest move at this point. But Kasparov plays the also winning a takes b5, after which Tal doesn't even bother recapturing, going full desperado now with bishop to f6. He wants some piece activity at any cost, which in this case will be the game if Kasparov continues to play correctly, which he does for the moment with rook takes f5, attacking the undefended bishop on f6 while threatening a discovered attack on black's queen. Looks pretty nasty, but Tal is in his element now and ready to start working his magic, beginning with rook to c8. A move which superficially looks like it might answer the threat of rook takes f6, with the move queen takes knight on b4 followed by rook takes queen if white recaptures. Only problem is, white doesn't have to recapture and can instead play queen takes h7 check, forcing checkmate in 8 moves. So white is all good to capture on f6 here, threatening to come into h7 with the queen, but Kasparov now throws away the win with knight to c6 check, allowing Tal to equalize the position with a move he didn't play, rook takes c6. Now if the pawn recaptures, then queen to a5 followed by rook to e1 check is going to run white into big trouble. And if bishop takes c6, there's rook to e1 check, king to a2, and queen to c4 check. If the queen blocks, then rook to a1 check wins the white queen. If king to a3, then rook to a1 is checkmate. And if b3, then there's queen takes c3, forcing the trade of queens due to the threat of mate on a1, with the engine giving total equality. Tal misses this drawing opportunity though, in the game where he plays king to b6, giving Kasparov a winning move, which he misses, queen to a4, guarding the a file while threatening queen takes a6 check or queen to a7 check if a takes b5 is played. Instead, we have bishop to b3 with a discovered attack on the black queen. Looks very natural, but once again, this allows Tal to escape. This time with a stunning sequence of moves, beginning with rook to e1 check. King to a2 is the only reasonable response. And what do you think Tal plays here? Pause the video if you want to try to guess. The magical move, now played by perhaps the greatest sacrificer in the history of the game, is a takes b5. Offering the queen, which Kasparov now accepts with rook takes c5. It is the best move, but now comes rook to a8 check, which nearly forces mate. Fortunately for Kasparov, he's got bishop to a4 blocking while giving his king an escape square on b3. And so after rook takes a4 check and the king goes to b3, Tal is now able to recapture on c5, equalizing the material count as he's now got the 2 rooks for the queen minus a pawn. Tal is now threatening to win the knight on c6, But infinitely more significant than that is the fact that he's threatening checkmate with the move c4, to which Kasparov only has one good defense. If you want to pause and try to spot it, go ahead. What he needs to play is queen to d2, counterattacking the rook on e1 while opening up the c2 square for his king. But Kasparov now blunders with queen to f5, attacking the bishop on f6. This allows black to cut off the white king with either rook to e2 or rook to c1, guarding c2, and so once again threatening the move c4 checkmate. But only one of these two moves is winning. If you want a real challenge, pause the video and try to determine which move black should now play, rook to e2 or rook to c1. The incorrect move, now played by Tal, is rook to e2. And I'm going to show you a variation in just a minute that will demonstrate why this move throws away the win. Kasparov continues with the correct move, knight to a5, ready to capture on c4 if white pushes his pawn there, or on f6 with check if rook takes knight is played, or on c5 if king takes knight is played. Now here, if black's rook were on c1 instead of e2, he could win with the move bishop to e7, threatening to win the knight on a5, which is trapped, and can't move anyway for the moment, or else c4 will be checkmate. Now with the rook on e2, queen to c8 is white's only path to survival, looking for perpetual check. And after c4 check and knight takes c4 check, the engine's giving rook takes c4 with near equality. But if b takes c4 check and king takes a4, now we see why it would be better to have the rook on c1, because in this position, rook to a1 would be checkmate. Unbelievable. With the rook on e2 though, black is just losing. And there are more relevant details to this quite complicated line that we don't have time to get into, but Tal doesn't go down this road in the game where after knight to a5, he finds an alternative drawing resource with a truly awesome move. Care to guess what it is? It is a sacrifice of a rook with rook to b4 check. Kasparov only has three legal responses. King to a2, which runs into checkmate in 6, beginning with rook b takes b2 check, followed by bishop takes c3. There's the correct move, king to a3, allowing a perpetual check beginning with rook to a4 check. And then there's the move played in the game, pawn takes rook on b4, allowing a gorgeous checkmate in 2 moves, now executed by Tal, with rook takes b2 check, king to a3, and c takes b4 checkmate. How beautiful is that? With these doubled pawns and rook working together to cover every square. This is why they call Tal the magician. Even in a totally lost position, he was so incredibly dangerous and quite capable of conjuring up a last-minute miracle mate right out of thin air, as he does in this amazing game. So let me know if you enjoyed this, and if you'd like to see me cover some other games from this historic Blitz encounter. Consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. Hit that like button to show your support if you liked the video. Don't hesitate to leave a comment with anything that's on your mind, and I will see you soon.